Hi everyone, welcome back. Oh God, prepare yourselves for today's case. Let's just take a deep breath. I feel like we all need it because I literally have no words for today's case. Today we're going to be covering the case of Shelly Knotek, and oh my God, this woman is the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst. She is sometimes known as the serial killer mom. She is also sometimes known as America's most evil mom. And you might be thinking, America's most evil mom? I've never even heard of her because she's not exactly very well known, but trust me, she deserves that title. Shelly was evil, cruel, sadistic. She is definitely one of the most evil people I've ever come across. Like, I literally have no words. She got off on inflicting twisted and cruel, inhumane punishments on people. And the people that she would inflict these punishments on were her own children, were other family members, friends, vulnerable people in the community. Literally no one was safe from the wrath of Shelly Knotek. And somehow, I really don't know how, she managed to fly under the radar for decades. But what is so unbelievable, I cannot even believe I'm saying this pure evil woman, Shelly Knotek, might be released this year. Like, seriously, what the hell? That makes my blood boil. What the actual hell? And I've actually wanted to do this case for a very long time. I've actually wanted to do it since last year, but I knew this case was going to be a lot, and it was more than I even thought it was going to be, which is obviously why I didn't upload last week. This video was supposed to go up last week, but I bit off more than I could chew with this case, and yeah, now we are here. And this is possibly going to be my longest video ever on my channel, and I feel like I've only just said that with the case of Franklin Delano Floyd. But here we are. Grab a whole 3-course meal. It's not going to be an easy case to listen to, so just be aware of that before we dive in. So we have a lot to unpack today, so yeah, let's just get straight into it. So I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is 2Dots. 2Dots is a free-to-play mobile game where you solve challenging puzzles by connecting the dots across thousands of levels within the game. Now, you guys know that I love a good mobile game when I'm taking breaks from my research or just breaks from day-to-day life, the stresses of day-to-day life, and 2Dots is literally the perfect game for that. The game is so simple, but it's so engaging. I literally never want to put it down. It's just a really relaxing game as well. There are no time limits on any of the levels, so there's no stresses of that. You can play at your own pace. There is a really relaxing soundtrack as well, and when you connect the dots, you get like a little buzz on your phone, which is always just really pleasing. And also the minimalistic design of the game is just absolutely gorgeous. I just love it. It's so simple, but I really just do love it. They also have a ton of other fun features in the game, like their weekly events such as their treasure hunts, and my personal favorite, the scavenger hunts. The scavenger hunts are honestly my favorite thing in the game. I would play these scavenger hunts all day. I'm currently playing this one, and it's pretty hard. I have got so many items here that I still haven't found. I just want to find all of these objects. Like, I'm just looking now and I'm supposed to be filming. So the scavenger hunts are just Where's Wally? Think Where's Wally, but in a mobile game. I used to love those books, so this is literally my childhood. You get this big map, which I just showed you, and they have all of these cute little characters and this gorgeous design and all of these hidden objects, and you have to find them, and they are really well hidden. And one more very exciting news. Like, I'm honestly so excited for this. But 2Dots have actually let me hide 5 of my own objects in the map. And I've tried to choose 5 objects that represent me, represent the channel. My 5 items are a lobster, because Friends, obviously one of my favorite TV shows, an eye and a lipstick because of makeup, and it also kind of goes with my merch, a succulent because obviously I have them in the background, and then a book because of all of the research that I do for these cases. And if you play 2Dots right now, you'll be able to find my 5 hidden objects in different levels of the Artistic Avenue map, which is available at level 13. And this event is only available for a limited time on Finding My Objects. It's available right now up until the 15th of August. So go download Two Dots right now using the link in my description box. It's completely free to play and you can find my 5 hidden objects, and let me know in the comments when you do. Thank you again to Two Dots for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to every single one of you watching right now, because without all of you guys I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's case. So Shelly, whose actual name is Michelle, but she goes by Shelly and we're just going to call her Shelly throughout this whole video. So Shelly Knotek was born on the 15th of April 1954, making her an Aries. She grew up in Battleground, Washington, where she lived with her dad Les and her stepmom Laura. She also lived with her 2 younger brothers who were named Chuck and Paul. Now growing up, Shelly did not have a straightforward childhood at all, which I am really not surprised. Her parents separated when she was extremely young, and for the first 6 years of Shelly's life, she lived with her birth mother. And we don't actually know too much about this time that Shelly was with her birth mother, but it has been described that her birth mother was extremely toxic. It was an extremely toxic environment. And her birth mother, who is a woman called Sharon, she also came from a very dysfunctional family herself. She had serious problems with alcohol. She neglected all 3 of her children. She also had a number of very abusive boyfriends, and I don't know if they also abused the children, but I wouldn't be surprised. But I'm sure the children did also witness that abuse themselves, which is obviously abuse in itself. So that is the kind of environment that Shelly was in for the first 6 years of her life, so not a good one. And then all of a sudden, when Shelly turned 6, her birth mother Sharon just was like, yeah, I don't want any of you kids anymore. I'm going to drop you off at your dad's and that is where you're going to live. So Shelly and her one brother Chuck, who was the middle child, they were both abandoned with their dad Les and their new stepmom Laura. And from this moment on, Shelly had no contact with her birth mother ever again. It was like Sharon just cut Shelly off and her brother Chuck instantly. She didn't want anything to do with them. There was no contact, there was no phone calls, there was no birthday cards, Christmas cards, nothing. And I just cannot even imagine the impact that would have had on Shelly and on her brother. Now, for some reason, her birth mother Sharon decided to keep the youngest child, Paul, at this time. I don't know why. So Shelly and her younger brother Chuck are now living with their dad Les and their stepmom Laura. Now Laura is a pretty big character in this story. She actually played a really big part in raising Shelly, and Laura didn't know what she was getting into. She actually didn't know that Les had children until they were dropped off at her doorstep, so that would have been a huge surprise. And Shelly has been described as the stepdaughter from hell. And I'm not saying that Shelly is a stepdaughter from hell lightly. I'm really not. I understand that Shelly has had a very traumatic childhood so far, and it's not the easiest thing to go and live with a different parent and then also a step parent. Trust me, I know. But in the case of Shelly, her stepmom really did try her best. She was a really good stepmother to Shelly. And in the beginning, Shelly's behavior could definitely have been put down to her acting out, her rebelling to the situation. She doesn't want to live with her dad. She doesn't want to live with her new stepmom. But some of the things that Shelly does is not normal for a child acting out. So pretty much the moment from when Shelly moved in, she told Laura on a daily basis how much she hated her, which is not like the most strange, bizarre thing. Like I said, in the beginning, her behavior could definitely be put down to acting out. Shelly also refused to do anything that she was told to do. Like, she wouldn't go to school. She wouldn't do just regular chores around the house, like tidying her bedroom, for example. And if Shelly didn't get her own way, she would kick and scream that house down. She would let everyone know. She turned everything into a huge drama. But her dad, Les, let her get away with this. Shelly was his little princess. She could do no wrong in his eyes. Shelly even had this strange control over her brother Chuck. And I really do mean strange control. So in the beginning, when Shelly and Chuck first arrived at the house, Chuck actually wouldn't really talk. Shelly would talk for him. It's like Shelly was literally his puppet master. It was a very weird situation. And Shelly would manipulate her brother and tell him what to do. She really was controlling him, and she would turn him against their stepmom, Lara. It was an extremely chaotic household. But that was only down to one factor, and that was Shelly. Nothing else about that household was chaotic at all. And her dad, Les, just kind of turned a blind eye to all of this. He didn't really do anything to help Shelly or try and stop her from doing any of this behavior. It was all left to Lara. She was left to pick up the pieces. But it wasn't just Shelly's dad, Les, that was the problem. It was also Les's mom, so Shelly's grandmother, a woman called Anna. Because Anna is equally as guilty as Les for enabling Shelly's behavior. And Anna is actually probably the reason why Shelly turned out as evil as she did. Anna was the matriarch of the family. She was married to a man called George, and together they owned and ran the family business, which was owning a string of nursing homes. And oh my God, was she a nightmare to work for. Everyone hated Anna. She ruled those nursing homes with an iron fist. And the kind of things that Anna did in this nursing home, oh my God, made me so angry. So the time frame that we're talking about here when Anna is running the nursing homes is in the 40s and 50s. Anna treated the staff, who were mostly very young, vulnerable women, absolutely horrifically. There's so many times where I just don't have words for the people involved in this case, and Anna and what she did to those staff, oh my God. If any of the staff ever stepped out of line, Anna would punch them, she would kick them, she would humiliate them, degrade them. She would make the staff wash her feet. There were even occasions where the punishments were so severe that she would get the staff members and shove their heads down the toilet as she would flush them. Can you even imagine working for somebody like that? Those poor staff members, oh my God. And Anna just got away with all of this, by the way. I should probably say that. She was never held accountable for any of this. And Anna was not just like this at work. She was also a terrible person to the people in her life, her family, her friends. She had complete control over everyone. I've already described Shelly as a puppet master. Well, Anna is the puppet master, and this is where Shelly learned a lot of these tactics from. Anna would force her husband George to sleep in a shed that was just outside in the garden for 20 years of their marriage, and we're talking about Washington here. That is where they live, and the winters in Washington, wow, they get cold. Anna physically and psychologically abused pretty much everyone around her. And I am bringing this up about Anna. I am going into quite a lot of detail because it is significant to the case. This is literally Shelly. Shelly has been described as her grandmother's little protege. Shelly would spend a lot of time with her grandmother, watching, learning. Shelly was probably the only person that Anna didn't really abuse. And I say really abuse because she did abuse her a little bit, obviously. But Shelly and Anna were inseparable. There were two peas in a pod. But unfortunately, Shelly would outgrow her grandmother and become even worse. So that was Shelly's childhood, basically. And now Shelly is 13 years old, which is obviously she's still a child. But we get to another very significant thing that happens in this case. And that is that her mother, Sharon, is murdered. I know, that's crazy, isn't it? That her own mother has been murdered. So her mother had gotten involved with an extremely abusive man. She was in a very toxic relationship. And in 1967, it's suspected that she was beaten to death in a motel room. And when this news got back to Shelly, you think that Shelly would be upset. She would be mortified. She would be breaking down. But Shelly didn't care. She didn't care that her mother had been murdered, that her mother was no longer here. And it's hard to actually know how Shelly took this news, because on the outside it seemed like she didn't care, but that doesn't mean that she didn't care on the inside. So now Shelly is obviously in her teenage years. Her mom has just been murdered and her behavior gets even worse from here, which is why I do think that her mother's murder affected her, because her behavior does escalate in a very bad way. Her behavior went from a bit cold and disruptive and ungrateful to now evil and sadistic. So with the death of her birth mother, her youngest brother, who was still with their birth mother, was now also living with them, and this was a young boy called Paul. From this moment on, Shelly resented any attention that was given to her younger siblings. She wanted to be the center of attention. And because her younger siblings obviously did get attention, I mean, they're children, of course they're going to, she would inflict cruel and sadistic punishments on her siblings. And I honestly can't believe what she did. I've actually never heard of anyone doing this. So she would take up broken pieces of glass and insert the glass into her siblings' shoes and literally just wait for her siblings to put their shoes on so she could see the agony that they went through by putting their feet on broken glass. I mean, Shelly's only 13, maybe 14 at this point when she has done this. What child, young teenager does that? But it didn't stop there. She would also take out her frustrations on her parents as well, Les and Laura. She would break things around the house. There was even one time where she tried to set the house on fire. Yeah, but that's not all. She would make up terrible lies about her parents. She would go round telling people that her stepmom Laura was abusing her, which of course she wasn't. She would tell people that she was being neglected. Laura was mean to her, all to get attention and sympathy. But there was one particular incident that just pushed her parents over the edge. So when Shelly was only 15 years old, she accused her dad, Les, of raping her. She had a meeting one day with a school counselor and she said, "My dad raped me." This was a flat out lie. I just feel like I need to say that. But of course, the school took this very, very seriously, as they should. And the school did a full investigation into this. They sent Shelly to a clinic to be checked over. The school called her parents in and told them, "Your daughter has made this accusation." And Les was completely broken by this. I mean, Shelly was his little princess. He did everything for Shelly. And now to hear that his little princess has made this false accusation, it completely broke him because it wasn't true. But an accusation like this, it will never leave you. It will follow you around. Shelly's lies and manipulation at this point had gone to a whole new level. However, a full physical examination was done on Shelly and it was found that she was still a virgin. She had not been raped. There was no bruising, there was no marks, there was no evidence whatsoever that she had been sexually abused or raped in any way. On the same evening that her parents found out about this, Laura went into Shelly's room. She started looking for any kind of evidence. She didn't believe that it was true. She was just looking to see what has happened, what has driven Shelly to make this accusation. And in Shelly's bed, it was actually like wedged under the mattress, she found a magazine, a True Confession magazine. And on the cover of this magazine, there was a bold headline which read, "I was raped at 15 by my father." And a light bulb literally went off in Laura's head. She was like, oh my God, this is where Shelly got the idea from. She had literally taken this story from this magazine and tried to sell it as her own. And I just don't understand why Shelly would do this. I mean, she had to go and have a full physical examination, which under the best circumstances, no one is going to want to go through that. Why would she even put herself through that? I feel like that just really sums up the kind of person that Shelly is, the extreme lengths that she will go to hurt other people. So following this rape claim, Shelly did get expelled from school. And from this moment on, she kind of bounces around different places, just causing chaos everywhere that she goes. For a short period of time, she actually goes on to live with her step-grandparents. So this is Laura's mom and dad, so not Anna, the different grandparents. And she was an absolute nightmare to her step-grandparents. So her grandparents would set her chores, like doing the dishes, for example. And Shelly's version of doing the dishes was just to throw everything out. Throw everything in the bin. It's like, who does that? Who the hell does that. She also volunteered to babysit the neighbors' children, which I don't know why anyone let her do that. But instead of actually looking after the children, she would actually barricade them into their room. She would actually put furniture up at the door so they couldn't get out. She would literally lock the children in their room whilst she just sat on the sofa eating chocolate, sweets, whatever she wanted, and watching TV. But then Shelly also made up false accusations that her step-grandfather was also sexually abusing her, which again was all a lie. And this was the tipping point. Her step-grandparents just didn't want anything more to do with her and they kicked her out. Shelly actually did bounce around a few more places after this. At one point she was living with her aunt and uncle, and again she caused so much trouble, so much so that all the trouble that Shelly caused, her aunt and uncle actually got divorced. Shelly is literally splitting up families here. Shelly even spent some time in a boarding school that was run by, quote, no-nonsense nuns. But in the boarding school, she caused so much trouble. She went back to her old tactics of putting broken glass into the other students' shoes. And the boarding school didn't want her either. They couldn't handle her, so she was kicked out of there. Shelly eventually does move back in with her parents, Les and Lara, until she finally turns 18, where she did move out, and her parents, Les and Lara, are probably thinking, thank God. So it's now February 1973. Shelly is now 18 years old, so she's an adult, and she's about to enter into another very chaotic stage of her life. Because over the next 10 years, Shelly goes on to have 3 husbands, and they are not healthy relationships, but did we expect anything else? So the first husband is a man called Randy Rivado. Now he was a very timid man and he didn't know how to handle Shelly at all. Shelly soon began to dominate every single aspect of Randy's life. She would make him do everything. He had to go out to work and earn the money. He had to do all of the chores while she just sat around the house with her feet up. Shelly would also demand all of his paychecks. She was in charge of the money of the house. He never really got a say in anything. If they ever fell out, if he ever annoyed her, she would literally lock him out of the house all night. He had to sleep somewhere. Most of the time he slept in his car. Now Randy worked with Shelly's dad Les at the nursing home business, and if Shelly ever struggled to control Randy, Shelly would literally phone up her dad and say, Dad, I'm struggling to control Randy. I'm going to need you to send his paychecks directly to me. And unbelievably, her dad agreed. Her dad gave her everything that she ever wanted. Her dad was probably the biggest enabler of her behavior. He allowed her to get away with everything, and this is the part of her life where she is learning that she can get away with everything. Even now as an adult, her dad is still sending her money to support her financially because she doesn't want to get a job. He would buy her clothes. He even bought her a car. But unfortunately, the car that he bought Shelly was not her dream car. So she had a hissy fit. There was one time where she even pretended to take an overdose on pills, and she went to the hospital and everything. Her stomach was pumped, and it was found that there was only 2 aspirin in her stomach. This was all because of the car situation, because she didn't get the car that she wanted. There was even one time where she asked for a new house. Who does that? Oh, can I have a new house? Her dad said no, because I'm sorry, but that's unreasonable. So Shelly staged a break-in. She even beat herself up and cut herself in various places to make it look like the person that had broken into the house had also attacked her. Then she went to her dad like, I'm not safe in this house. It's been broken into. Look at me. And unbelievably, she got what she wanted. It's crazy. I really do think that this was a defining point in her life, her early adult years. She really is honing her skills as a master manipulator, someone that is figuring out how people work, figuring out how she can get what she wants out of people. So now we get to another very significant stage in this story. It is currently February of 1975, so Shelly is currently 20 years old, and this is when she gives birth for the first time, and she gives birth to her first daughter one of 3 daughters that she will go on to have, and this girl is called Nikki. And when Nikki was born, everyone was thinking, oh, maybe this will help Shelly, maybe this will put her on the right path, make her grow up. But that wasn't the case at all, because literally as soon as she's born, she doesn't want her. She doesn't want Nikki. Not long after Nikki is born, she ends up divorcing Randy, and then she just disappears. She drops Nikki off at Laura's house and just disappears. She doesn't want anything to do with her daughter. Now, I do wonder, does this have something to do with her own birth mother? Because obviously her own birth mother abandoned her, just dropped her off and left her. I almost wonder, is there a parallel there? And eventually, after that year, she does return and she just picks Nikki up as if nothing has happened. She then quickly went on to find her second husband, a man called Danny. She goes on to have another child, another daughter called Sammy. And she's in her mid-20s at this point. She's married to Danny for approximately 5 years, and the marriage to Danny is very similar to the marriage to Randy. She emotionally abuses him, physically abuses him, she breaks him down, she controls him, manipulates him. And after 5 years, Danny just couldn't take it anymore and he gets up and leaves. So now we get to 1983. Shelly is currently 29 years old, and this is when she meets her third and final husband, Dave Knotek. Now, this is a very significant relationship because Dave, what do I have to say about Dave? So Dave first started off as a victim of Shelly's. There is no doubt about that whatsoever. But Dave would go on to become her partner in crime. He would become a willing participant. Not all the time, he wasn't always willing, but most of the time he was a willing participant. And they would go on together to commit some of the most horrific crimes, inhumane acts imaginable. But we've got a lot to get through before we get to all of that. So back when they first meet, Dave falls hard for Shelly. Shelly seemed to have this ability to charm people. People just gravitated towards her. She had this aura that she would literally suck people in. And Dave has been described by people as a, quote, late bloomer. He had never really had a serious girlfriend up until this point. And when he met Shelly, he met her in a bar and she started like talking to him, flirting with him. He couldn't believe his luck. He was like, oh my God, who is this magnificent woman? And they quickly start dating because Dave literally falls hard for her. And not long after they start dating, Shelly tells Dave that she has cancer, which of course, not true, but she's up to her old tricks, lying to people to manipulate them. And this is exactly what she did to Dave. She manipulated him and almost guilt-tripped him into marrying her. She spun this story that she didn't have that long to live and she was really worried and concerned about her daughters because no one was going to be able to look after them. She needed to find someone to care for her daughters. And Dave thought, right, that's me. I'm stepping up. I want to be a father to your children. So they get married and they move in together and they are now living as a family of 4, Shelly, Dave, Nikki and Sammy. And at this point, Nikki is 12 years old and Sammy is 9 years old. Now, up until this point, Nikki and Sammy had a pretty straightforward life relationship with their mom. Obviously, it wasn't the best because Shelly is their mother, but this was all about to change. And I don't know why. Like, I honestly don't know what changed because from this moment on, Shelly's behavior towards her children, especially Nikki, the oldest, oh my God, it completely changed. She put those children through hell and back. So first of all, she had to get Dave on her side. Like I said, he becomes her partner in crime, but she needs to convince him to become her partner in crime. So she starts by abusing him. He is her first victim in this household. She starts to condition him into thinking like her. She isolates him from his friends, his family. She makes him go out to work. She makes him do the chores. It's actually very similar to her first 2 marriages, but she's just stepped up the psychological abuse. I think that's the only thing that has really changed. And she was also physically abusive to Dave. She would physically beat him up if she thought he wasn't working hard enough, if the chores weren't done properly, if he wasn't earning enough money, if she just was unhappy for some reason. She would also verbally abuse him, calling him worthless, calling him a terrible husband, a terrible father. And then what is just very typical from abusers like Shelly, after abusing her husband, Dave, she would show him affection. You know, the typical love bombing, saying that she's sorry, saying that it won't happen again, showering him with love, hugs, physical affection. She literally went from a monster to the sweetest person ever in a split second. Dave was so completely beaten down, both psychologically and physically, that one day Nikki and Sammy actually found Dave with a shotgun in his mouth. He wanted to take his own life. Shelly did manage to talk him down, but she knew from that day onwards that she had complete control over Dave. He would do anything for her. He would do her bidding for her. And Dave didn't know how it happened, but it happened very slowly over years. It built up over time. But Dave went from a very sweet, caring person, the kind of person that steps up to be Nikki and Sammy's dad because he thinks that their mother is terminally ill, to now Dave is now a person, a shell of a person without a mind of his own. And up until this point, I think anyone would feel sorry for Dave because he is a victim of Shellys. But from this moment forward, he is now a willing participant in the abuse and torture of Shelley's children and others. So from this moment forward, it's hard to actually feel sorry for Dave. So now that Shelly had Dave completely on her side, this is where the extreme abuse of Nikki started. Nikki has just entered into her teenage years. Just like with Dave, Shelly wanted complete control over Nikki. And if Nikki ever did anything that Shelly didn't like, that annoyed Shelly, Nikki would be beaten up. And she would be beaten up in a number of different ways. Everything was a weapon to Shelly, whether it was a spatula from the kitchen drawer, whether it was a book. She would be repeatedly beaten, punched, kicked, whipped for even the smallest things. Most of the time there wasn't a reason why she was being beaten up, and then other times it would be for the smallest, stupidest things, like using her mom's makeup. And as time went on, the beatings got more and more brutal, and this seemed to excite Shelly. It seemed to get her off. The more brutal it was, the more exhilarated she became. Shelly would jump on top of Nikki, pin her to the ground, repeatedly punch her. She would say things like, "You little bitch, you're worthless, you're a pig." She would punch her and slap her until she drew blood. There was one occasion where Shelly threw Nikki against a wall and her head hit a protruding nail. And obviously, a nail anywhere but a nail in the head, so much blood was pouring from her head. Nikki never went to the hospital for any of her injuries, and some of them would have required her to go to the hospital. And again, just like she did with Dave, after Shelly beat her up and abused her, she would show affection. She would tell her how much she loved her, how much she's sorry, how much it won't happen again. It got to a point where Nikki was having to wear makeup to cover the bruises and the cuts on her skin. She was having to wear opaque tights to cover the bruises on her legs. Nikki never said a word to anyone about the abuse. Obviously, everyone in the household knew, but she never told teachers. She never told any other family members that lived outside of the house. And also, so far, we've only talked about the abuse of Nikki because Nikki was Shelly's main target. But Shelly was also psychologically abusing her younger daughter, Sammy. First of all, privileges were taken away from both girls. Neither one of them were allowed to have fun, essentially. So any luxury item was taken away. But it wasn't just luxury items that were taken away from them, it was also basic human needs. Shelly started to restrict their bathroom privileges. They were never allowed to use the toilet unless Shelly allowed it. And even when they were allowed to use the toilet, Shelly would stand there and watch. They were also no longer allowed to shower. They were not allowed to shower. Let that sink in. The only sort of shower that they got was being hosed down naked in the back garden. They weren't allowed any form of washing. It's absolutely crazy. They had to go to school smelly. They weren't allowed clean clothes either. They had to go to school in dirty clothes. Can you even imagine how traumatic that would be for anyone? But it gets even worse than that. There would be times where Shelly would lock the girls in their room and they would be left there for hours, if not days. There was one time where Nikki was locked in her bedroom for an entire summer. She was given a bucket to use as the toilet. But just to put things into a really messed up perspective, Nikki actually enjoyed that summer. Oh my God, it's heartbreaking. How can anyone enjoy being locked up? But the thing is, Nikki being locked up meant that she was away from her mother. When she was in her room, Shelly didn't beat her up. She managed to get her hands on some books and she read that whole summer. And she was quite happy to be locked up in her room rather than be in her mother's presence. And Shelly would also constantly tell her two daughters that they were worthless, that they were stupid, that they were no good at anything, that they're pigs, that they make her sick. And then once again, after all of this is done, she would love bomb them. And she was especially sadistic around the holidays. At Christmas, she would buy her girls lots of gifts, shower them with affection, love bomb them. The girls would be really excited to open their presents on Christmas morning, and then pretty much instantly, Shelly would take their gifts away. So she would give them that split second of happiness, of joy with their gifts, and then she snatched it away. She would take their gifts, such as Cabbage Patch dolls, and she would hide them in a closet, and then she would put masking tape on the closet so she would know if the girls had tried to get at their gifts. Everything was a game for Shelly. I can literally imagine her every single day waking up and thinking, how can I be worse today than I was yesterday? And what is just truly, truly heartbreaking is that both Nikki and Sammy wanted to please their mom. That is all they wanted to do. They craved the affection from their mom. So even though they had to go through all of this abuse and torture, they actually looked forward to the love bombing after, because it was the only time that they got any affection. And then finally, one of the worst forms of abuse to these two girls is that Shelly tried to put a wedge between them because they were really close. They were best friends. They were in this together. They were all they had, really. And Shelly didn't want them to get too close, because if they got too close, they could join together, join forces and go up against her. So Shelly always favoured Sammy over Nikki. She would try to play them against each other. She would try to make the girls resent each other. She would always try to make Sammy feel more special, more loved. She would always be more sadistic towards Nikki. She would always beat Nikki up. Her punishments were always harsher. Sammy never understood why she was favoured and why Nikki was treated so badly. She felt powerless. She wanted to help her sister. But if Sammy ever helped Nikki, the punishments of Nikki would be even worse. And in the end, Sammy realized that there was nothing that she could do. There was nothing that she could do to help her sister. So she learned in the end to be thankful that she didn't get it as bad. But thankfully, even though their mother tried so hard, the sisters stayed close. They had a really strong bond. They didn't resent each other. They were in this together. Both of them understood that it was neither one of their faults why this was happening. Both Nikki and Sammy were incredibly strong. Whenever Nikki would get beaten up, whenever she had wounds or anything, Sammy would sneak into her room and help her where she could behind her mom's back. Sammy would crawl into bed with Nikki and they would share stories, and they would come up with fantasies about how they would escape and lock their mom in the crawl space of the house. But unfortunately, the worst is still to come. So we need to talk about a certain form of torture that Shelly started to inflict, and she even came up with a name for this torture. And this torture technique she called wallowing. Now, it's kind of hard to explain and actually put into words how bad this was, but it was basically a form of torture to completely humiliate, cause physical pain, psychological pain. So how this would happen is in the middle of the night, because most of the time it was in the middle of the night when it happened, Shelly would burst into Nikki's room while she was asleep, while it was dark. She would flip on the lights and scream at Nikki, "Get up, get up right now, clothes off, get the fuck downstairs, get outside, and screaming at Nikki that she is a worthless piece of shit. So Nikki was forced in the middle of the night to get up, strip naked, and go outside in the freezing cold. She would be forced naked to roll around in dirt and just like be in the ground and basically acts like an animal, like a pig. Shelly would actually repeatedly shout at her, "You're a pig." And the whole time when Nikki is doing this, Dave, willing participant, is spraying her down with a hose with freezing cold water. And Shelly would be shouting things from the sidelines. "Make her wallow, Dave. Make her. She's a pig. Teach her a lesson. She's a dirty pig." And I just don't have any words. Why would someone do that? Shelly is clearly getting off on having complete control over everyone. And then after the longest time, sometimes up to 2 hours, Nikki would finally be dragged back into the house. And then this is when she was put into a bath of boiling hot water. So Nikki has just gone from being hosed down with freezing cold water, she's probably frozen to the bone, and now she's being put in a hot bath, a boiling hot bath. The searing pain that must have gone through her body, I cannot even imagine. And this would happen night after night, night after night. Every time Nikki went to bed, she didn't know if she was going to be made to wallow in the middle of the night. That alone is psychological abuse, that she never felt safe, never felt comfortable even to go to sleep. So it already feels like I have covered a lot, doesn't it? But we are still not even scratching the surface. Because Shelly's own children, Nikki and Sammy, were not her only victims. Over time, Shelly would actually move people into her house with the full intention of them also becoming her victims. The sadistic torture of her own children wasn't enough. That is something that you need to bear in mind with Shelly, is that she gets bored very easily. She always wants a new victim. She always wants a main target. And now we get to the next phase of this case where Shelly moves in her next victim, 13-year-old Shane Watson. Now, Shane was Shelly's nephew. I don't know if you remember earlier on in the case, Shelly had 2 other siblings. Well, her youngest sibling, Paul, had gone to prison and he had a son who was Shane, and Shane was now homeless. So Shelly swooped in, saving the day, being the hero that she wants everyone else to view her as, said, "I'll take Shane, I'll give him somewhere to live, I'll look after him." Everyone thought, "Oh my God, Shelly's here to save the day." But that wasn't the case. Shelly saw a vulnerable person and pounced. Everyone else seemed to fall for Shelly's hero act, but Shelly fully intended for Shane to be her next victim. So when Shane first arrived at the house, it was actually pretty good, because that is what Shelly would do. She would lure you under false pretenses, make you feel safe and secure before she snatched it away from you. And in the beginning, Shane felt like he was part of the family. He was really close to Nikki and Sammy. They were like sisters to him. He felt like Shelly and Dave were the parents he never had. Everything was going great. Shane was really thankful that Shelly had taken him in. I mean, otherwise he would be homeless. So in the beginning, Shelly started to give Shane chores. Now, at first, Shane happily did these chores. He felt like he should do them. He should pay his way. He's very thankful that Shelly and Dave are letting him stay there, so he was fine. Give me all the chores you want. And I honestly don't understand why Shelly gets off so much on chores. She gives everyone chores, and she loves watching people do chores while she puts her feet up. So she gives Shane a pretty long list of chores, but he does them willingly. He thinks it's only fair. But the list of chores was never ending, and they got more and more ridiculous. They weren't like regular chores. If Shane ever said no to any of these chores, if he ever did them not up to Shelly's standard, or if he took too long, Shelly would beat and whip him. Now, it didn't start like this. When he first started doing chores, she never did this, because this is what Shelly does. She slowly bides her time. She slowly breaks people down. So at first there was no beatings. Then it was the odd punch, the odd hit, the odd push. Then it got to every single time he didn't do something right, he would be punched, kicked, whipped. The next time, the punches, the kicks would be harder. Then weapons would be involved. Do you see what I mean? It was a slow progression, a slow build-up. The next thing is that his shower privileges were also taken away. He wasn't allowed to shower. He was hosed down in the garden naked, just like Nikki and Sammy. He was forced to go to school in dirty clothes, smelly. He went from the cool new guy at school to the smelly weird guy. Then his personal belongings were taken away, one by one, slowly over time, slowly stripping him of any identity. Then he was forced to sleep in the basement. Then his blanket and pillow was taken away, so he just had to sleep on the cold, hard floor of the basement. And then finally, Shane was also made to wallow. Just like Nikki, he was forced outside in the middle of the night, forced to strip, forced to roll around in the mud, all whilst being soaked with a hose with freezing cold water. He then started to question, is this normal? Do I deserve this? Shelly would mess with people's minds so much that they truly thought that they deserved all of this abuse. And he didn't really even get a chance to fully process what was happening to him. He was so young. He was only 13 when he first arrived at Shellys. And before he knew it, he had become another prisoner of Shellys. Shane was also subjected to the love bombing as well. So whenever the abuse started, it would stop. Shelly would shower him with love and affection. And Shane as well learned to crave that attention, that love that he got from Shelly in those split seconds. Amazingly, even though all of the children were being subjected to this abuse and torture, the children actually had a very close bond. Shane grew very close to Nikki and Sammy, and they all helped each other through this. They would spend hours being co-conspirators, talking about how messed up Shelly was, what they would do if they could run away, their hopes, their dreams. Nikki and Shane especially grew very close because those two were the main victims at this current time. Shelly hated the bond between Nikki and Shane. She would always be looking for different ways to break them down, to humiliate them. And Shelly came up with the most, I don't even know how I would describe it. She forced both Shane and Nikki, who were both teenagers at this point, they're also cousins, to strip naked in the living room and slow dance with each other, with the rest of the family watching. And Shelly is just laughing at them the whole time. Shane and Nikki are crying the whole time they are dancing. This is all just for Shelly's amusement. It's said that there was nothing sexual about this. Shelly didn't get off on this sexually. And there is actually a lot of nudity in this case. Shelly does make people strip naked and she does more stuff, which we're obviously going to get to. But stripping somebody naked is such a sadistic torture tactic to completely make that person vulnerable, to strip them of everything, pure humiliation, pure embarrassment. But if that is not horrifying enough, we now have to move on to the next victim. You heard that right, the next victim. This new victim was a woman called Kathy Loreno. She was currently 30 years old. Now, she was a really good friend of Shelly's. She was also Shelly's hairdresser, and she had recently fallen on bad times and she found herself needing a place to live. And Shelly swoops in to save the day and she gives Kathy a place to live in her home. Now, Kathy was described as such a kind-hearted, sweet person, would do anything for anyone. So Kathy is about to move in, but just before she moves in, we do have a few other things that happen because there is so much that goes on in this case. So Shelly is currently 34 years old and she falls pregnant with Dave's first child. She would soon give birth to a baby girl that they would call Tori. Now, Dave was really excited about the pregnancy, about the baby, and he was amazed that Shelly was even able to get pregnant with all of the chemo that she was on. Bet you forgot about that, didn't you? Don't forget, all of this time, from the moment she met Dave, she's been pretending to have cancer. She has been pretending to go to appointments. She has been pretending to get chemo. Dave has been thinking that Shelly has cancer for years. She even shaved her eyebrows and her head like Dave truly believes. I mean, I don't know if he does. He claims to have truly believed that she had cancer. So then the baby is born, Tori is born, and Shelly basically went through a whole phase of Munchausen by proxy, which unfortunately I do not have time to get into because there is so much that happens in this case. But there were numerous times where Shelly would fake illnesses of Tori. She would tell people Tori's really ill, she's really sick, to gain attention and sympathy. She even tried to suffocate baby Tori with a pillow at one point as well. So all of that was going on, and this is when Kathy moves in. Now Dave at first wasn't too pleased. He didn't want Kathy to live with them, but Shelly said to him, I need someone to help me look after the baby, so Kathy has to move in. So currently in this house right now, we have Shelly, Dave, Nikki, Sammy, Shane, now baby Tori, and now Kathy. And Kathy worshipped the ground that Shelly walked on. I mean, she was so thankful that Shelly had given her somewhere to live, very much like Shane. Kathy wanted to do anything she could to repay Shelly for letting her stay there, but unfortunately she didn't have any idea what Shelly had in store for her. As well as the abuse towards Nikki, Sammy, Shane, Kathy would now also be abused and tortured. But with Kathy, Shelly took it to a whole nother level, if that is even possible. So first of all, Kathy was given a long list of chores. I just want to point out here that Shelly is literally the laziest person in the world. She does not lift a finger in that house. Dirty dishes, dirty washing would just pile up everywhere. She would sit on the sofa all day watching TV, eating chocolate and shoving the wrappers down the side of the sofa. And at first, just like Shane, Kathy was more than happy to help. But no matter how hard Kathy worked, nothing was ever good enough. Shelly would make Kathy feel worthless, like she was no good. First of all, Shelly wanted to isolate Kathy, make Kathy feel like she had no one else but Shelly. Whenever Kathy's family called Shelly's home, Shelly would be the one to answer, and she would spill loads of lies about Kathy to her family. She would say, Kathy no longer wants anything to do with you. Kathy ran away. She doesn't want to see you. She doesn't want to talk to you. And Shelly spun so many lies about Kathy that Kathy's own family actually disowned her, which breaks my heart. And Shelly also came up with another strategy to completely control Kathy, and that was to completely gaslight her. First of all, it started with Shelly pumping Kathy with a load of sleeping pills. And then, because Kathy was so drugged up, Shelly started to warp her reality around her. Shelly started making up stories saying that Kathy was sleepwalking. She was sleepwalking to the fridge. She was eating all the food. Shelly would literally sprinkle crumbs on Kathy's bed to make Kathy think that she actually was sleepwalking and going to the fridge and then bringing food back to her bed and eating it. And of course, none of this is true, but Kathy would believe it, and she would say, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't remember that. I'm so sorry for eating all of the food in the fridge. But then there was one more thing that Shelly did to warp her reality and to make Kathy believe that she was doing these things whilst she was asleep. Shelly told Kathy that she had been sleepwalking naked and had gotten into bed with Shane and started to make sexual advances on him. And Shane, don't forget, he is also being abused and tortured. He was forced to back up this story. Kathy was absolutely horrified. This wasn't like her, but Shelly told her that it was true, so it must be true. Kathy had broken down crying, and she was apologizing profusely, saying that she wouldn't do it again. By this time, Kathy was now completely broken. Shelly finally had full control over Kathy. And then the same campaign of abuse and torture that Nikki and Shane have gone through, now it was Kathy's turn. It started with Kathy receiving regular beatings with various different weapons, such as an electric cord, books, kitchen utensils. Her personal items were confiscated one by one, stripping her of any identity. Her items of clothing were also taken away. Kathy was left with one pair of knickers and one bra. That was it. That is all she had to wear. But they were also soon taken away, and Kathy was forced to go around the house, do chores, do everything naked. She was forced to sleep on the floor in the freezing cold, tiny basement. Her bathing privileges were also taken away. She was only bathed by being hosed down in the garden. She would be locked in a closet for punishment for hours on end. Food was also being restricted from Kathy. Her teeth had started to rot before they all fell out. Shelly even hacked off all her hair with a pair of scissors, just for the fun of it. But to make matters even worse, Shelly would force the children to also beat up Kathy. This woman will literally stop at nothing. Nikki and Sammy were forced to follow Kathy around the house, and if she wasn't working hard enough, they would snap rubber bands at her. Shane was forced to do the most to Kathy. He was forced into beating her up physically, punching her, kicking her, using weapons. Shane did this because he knew that if he didn't, he would be tortured and abused himself 10 times worse. But then when Shane would beat up Kathy, Shelly would pretend to be the hero all over again. She would jump in the middle and say, Kathy, I'll stop this. I'll protect you. There was one time where Shane actually was instructed to take Kathy into another room, beat her up, and then Shelly came bursting into the room like she is the hero to protect Kathy. Even though it was her idea to begin with, the mind games that she is playing with everyone are on another level. And Dave would join in too. I know we haven't really mentioned him much because he actually worked away Monday to Friday, so he wasn't at the house, so he was only ever there on the weekends. But whenever he was there, he would join in. Dave was also willingly abusing Kathy. And I'll give you one example of the terrible abuse of Kathy where Dave is a willing participant. So one day, I don't know why, but Shelly decided that Kathy needed extra punishment. She had done something clearly terrible in Shelly's eyes. So she forced Kathy outside naked, and it was freezing cold. It was in the winter. It was snowing. She forced Kathy to climb up a steep snow-covered hill that was just behind the house. Dave was stood at the top of the hill, and as soon as she reached the top of the hill, Dave literally pushed her down the hill. And this hill was not a smooth hill. It was rocky, there was sharp rocks, stones, gravel, and Kathy rolled down this whole hill, and she's completely naked. She is cut and bruised, she is bleeding, and as soon as she reaches the bottom, Shelly says, get up right now, go back up to the top of the hill. So Kathy crawls her way back up to the top of the hill, and as soon as she reaches the top, Dave pushes her again, and this goes on and on. Kathy is forced to go back up the hill. Dave pushes her down, and Nikki, Sammy, and Shane are forced to watch this. And this whole cycle of her going up the hill, being pushed back down, went on for hours. Nikki, Sammy, and Shane have said that there was a red stripe down that hill because Kathy was losing so much blood. And that just sounds unreal. It does, doesn't it? Like, so many things in this case just seem unreal. They seem too far-fetched. How is this reality? But that's what it was. It became reality for Kathy, Nikki, Sammy, and Shane. And it went on for years. This was their reality for years. And I think we just need to take a moment right now to pause and actually look at Shelly's messed up world and how it functioned. So Dave worked away from home. He worked Monday to Friday away, and then he would be back at the weekends. And during the week, when he was at work, Dave lived in a tent. He pretty much was surviving on no money, essentially, and he was sending all of his money back to Shelly. Shelly would lounge around the house, unemployed, barking orders at everybody else, getting everybody else to do everything for her. She would be ruling the house, ruling Nikki, Sammy, Shane, and Kathy with an iron fist. And it was normal for the family to be watching TV, and Kathy would just be crawling around naked, doing chores around them. And no one was even allowed to look at Kathy, acknowledge that she was there. And tragically, the mindset of Nikki, Sammy, and Shane was, well, if mom is punishing Kathy, she's not punishing us. Because that's the thing with Shelly. It doesn't mean that Nikki, Sammy, and Shane were not being abused, but she always had one main victim, one person that she would focus on. It started off as Nikki. She was the main victim over Sammy. Then Shane moved in. Shane was then the new main victim, and Nikki did get it a little bit easier. Now Kathy has moved in, and Kathy is the main victim, and Shane is getting it a little bit easier, but they're all still being abused. I just want to make that very clear. What just breaks my heart though is that Kathy willingly took the abuse, the beatings, because she knew that if she wasn't being abused, the kids would be. She rather it was her that was being abused, not the kids. And Kathy, she's so incredibly strong. The kids would regularly reach out to Kathy, try and comfort her, help her in any way, but every single time Kathy would push them away. She would say, no, you can't help me. Your mom will find out and then punish you. She wanted to protect the children. She had their best interests in her heart, which is more than Shelly has ever had. And unbelievably, Nikki, Sammy, and Shane were all going to school. Whilst this was all happening, they were attempting to live a somewhat normal life outside of that house. Nikki and Shane did struggle a lot in school, but Sammy actually had a pretty regular, normal school life. She had a lot of friends. She had a boyfriend, and her friends and her boyfriend would actually come over and visit her at the house. And when I found out that guests were allowed in this house, I was like, what the hell? How is no one noticing anything that is going on? Every time that guests came around to the house, Kathy was locked in a closet or the shed outside. She was locked in there for hours, and she was only allowed out when guests left. And Shelly played the perfect host to any guests that she had. Apparently, appearances are very important to Shelly. The family even went on vacations, which is just crazy. And Kathy would tag along as essentially the family servant. And the treatment of Kathy when they went away is absolutely disgusting. They forced Kathy to ride in the trunk. She wasn't allowed in the car. She wasn't allowed a seat. She had to be in the trunk, where she was locked in there for hours on end. It was incredibly hot, stuffy. I'm sure we can all imagine that it was hard to breathe in there. And then once they were on vacation, Kathy was made to sleep under the car. Everybody else had sleeping bags. They were in tents. Kathy wasn't even allowed a tent, not even a sleeping bag. And at various times, Nikki, Sammy, Shane, and Kathy all did try to escape. It was never together. It was always separately, and it was various times over the years. But every single time one of them made a run for it, Shelly would always find them. She would always hunt them down. She has actually been described as a master hunter. Sometimes it would take days to find whoever had ran away, but Shelly did not stop until she found them, and she always did. And when they returned back to the house, Shelly would shower them in affection with love because she didn't want them to escape again. She made everyone feel helpless, like they only had her. And right now, there are two huge questions that I had in my mind. One being, why the hell is Shelly doing this? And two, why are people not escaping? Why are people putting up with this? I mean, the children, Nikki, Sammy, and Shane, I feel like it's pretty obvious. They are children. They are very vulnerable. They do feel like they have nowhere to go. But Dave, he is still kind of a victim, so we will include him in this. Dave and Kathy are adults. Dave especially goes away. He travels quite far to go to work Monday and Friday. At any point, he could run. And then Kathy obviously knows that what is happening to her isn't right. She has grown up her whole life. She is an adult, and now as an adult, she's being subjected to this. Whereas the children, this is kind of all they've known. It's really hard to wrap your head around. Why is nobody escaping successfully? Why are they possibly not trying harder? But we have to remember that Shelly is a master manipulator. I have looked into a lot of cases now, and people being manipulative is a very common thing in these cases. But Shelly has to be up there with one of the best or worst, however you want to put it. She has beat her victims into submission. She has also isolated both Dave and Kathy from everyone. I truly believe, especially with Kathy, that they felt like they had nowhere to go. They had nowhere else. And then when it comes to answering the question of why the hell is Shelly doing this, I honestly don't know. I try to analyze these people. I try to research these things and topics. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I normally try and come up with some kind of theory. You guys know that my mind wanders sometimes. Is this all about power, about control? Is she getting off on humiliating people? Is she a sadist? Or is this just a case of she is the biggest bully in the world? I honestly I don't know. I don't know. All of the above. I don't know. So we now need to skip forward a few years, and we are now in the summer of 1992. And just to give a perspective, because I know the timeline has probably been very confusing in this case, but Kathy and Shane have been living with Shelly now for 4 years. They have been trapped in this hellhole for 4 years, and obviously Nikki and Sammy a lot longer. Shelly is currently 38 years old. Nikki and Shane are both 17. Sammy is currently 14, and baby Tori, is now 3 years old. And this is when a significant thing happens, and that is the whole family move. They move into a new home on Monahan Landing Road in Raymond, Washington. And this is significant because it is this house that is known as Shelly Knotek's House of Horrors. I know, the last one was bad, but this one's even worse. She made everyone renovate the house, apart from herself, obviously. She made them work grueling hours. She made them do ridiculous tasks as well. Like Nikki had to paint this whole outer building situation with a 1-inch brush. Like, seriously, what the hell? It took her the whole summer. Shelly would just lounge around eating chocolate, barking demands, and if anyone didn't do anything to her standard, wasn't quick enough, or they just didn't do it, she would issue out beatings. She would be punishing them constantly. But oh my God, Shane's punishments were taken to a whole another level. He was made to sleep on the floor, on the concrete floor with no mattress. He would also, on occasions, be duct taped to a wall for hours. There was also this one time where he was forced to strip naked in front of the whole family, and then Shelly applied Icy Hot, which is a very strong cooling menthol pain reliever, to his genital area. And he was screaming out in pain. Oh my God, can you even imagine? I mean, none of us can. He was screaming, and the whole family just had to watch this. But when they moved into this house, the worst of the abuse was reserved for Kathy. Shelly was described as treating her like a sadist's worst pet. She would inflict so much pain and torture on Kathy, even more than before. Kathy had now started to lose the will to live, and it would soon all end in absolute tragedy. Kathy once again was forced to only bathe by hose outside, but this time she wasn't even allowed to use soap. Shelly would pour bleach over her, shouting things, "You're a filthy pig, Kathy. This will clean you up." And Kathy, she's being abused pretty much every single hour of every day. She is covered in cuts, some of them open wounds, and Shelly is pouring bleach over her, and the bleach is going into her cuts, her wounds. She would scream out in pain, but then Dave would duct tape her mouth shut so none of the neighbours heard. Kathy would also only be fed rotten food. Yeah, it's why? She had to eat spoiled meat and moldy vegetables, and Shelly would put all of this into a blender, obviously blend it all up, and then she gave this to Kathy to drink. Shelly would also force Kathy to eat a cup of salt. She was forced to eat every last bit of a cup of salt. How can anyone even do that? I just can't. She would be physically choking on the salt, but Shelly would not let her stop until she finished. There were many times where Kathy would just pass out because of the abuse, like her body could not take it anymore, but Shelly would wake her back up because she wanted Kathy awake. Shelly even went as far as to waterboard Kathy. She made Dave build a homemade device. And Shelly and Dave would both be the ones to waterboard Kathy. I just really don't understand Dave. Like, why is he doing this? Apparently, he justified the abuse to the children as sometimes children do need a tough hand. They do need to be punished and they do need to learn the ways of the world, which is obviously a load of crap. But how is he justifying this abuse of Kathy? And if that wasn't bad enough, Kathy had to sleep outside. She was forced to sleep in this really small outer house that was very dark, it was cramped, it was smelly, it was damp, and she would be locked in there for days, sometimes months. She eventually lost so much weight. She actually lost over 100 pounds, and she was so weak that she had to be dragged from this little outer house back into the main house. There was one time where they dragged Kathy in from that outer house and they put her in the shower to clean her up, but she couldn't stand up. She was just too weak and she fell through the glass panel on the shower. Glass shattered everywhere and she was on the floor. She fell on the glass and there was cuts all over her body, and these were serious cuts. Like, she needed to go to hospital. These cuts were deep. But of course, Shelly never let her go to the hospital. She never let anyone go to the hospital. Shelly just bandaged Kathy up as best as she could, which was not very good. And after this incident of Kathy falling through the shower, Kathy one time was just sat on the sofa, a rare privilege, and she had one of Tori's, baby Tori's little games. Think of like a puzzle game, like a really easy puzzle game, but for a 3-year-old, so it's obviously a little bit challenging for a 3-year-old. Kathy was sat there with this puzzle in her hand and she couldn't figure it out. Like, her brain was not processing what the toy was, what she had to do. After 5 years of torture, and I don't know if that shower incident did cause some sort of brain injury, damage, I don't know. But after 5 years of torture, her brain was now failing to function. She's literally wasting away. This was so drawn out and so slow and so sadistic. Her hair had completely fallen out. All of her teeth had fallen out by this point. She didn't have any balance. She couldn't walk properly. I honestly don't know how she managed to fight for as long as she did. I really don't. And tragically, the day was approaching where she couldn't fight anymore. One day in July 1994, this is approximately 6 years after Kathy first moved in, Dave returned home from work and he could hear these strange gargling noises coming from the laundry room. He investigated the noise and he found Kathy choking on her own vomit. Now, Dave went into a real panic. He dropped to the floor. He tried to get the vomit out of her mouth, out of her nose. He was also giving her CPR. And Dave carried on with this for a very long time, hoping that he could do something, hoping that he could save her. But tragically, it was too late. After years of being completely tortured, abused, and broken, Kathy Loreno had lost her life at the hands of Shelly Knotek. And I truly wish that it had ended differently for Kathy. I wish that she was able to escape and find happiness again in her life, smile again, but she never did. She was innocent and she had fallen on hard times and she thought that her friend, one of her good friends, Shelly, was helping her. It's what she went through. Oh God, I can't keep it together. You just can't even process it. And unbelievably, no one came looking for Kathy. Like I said earlier on in the story, Kathy's family had pretty much disowned her. And Shelly, for now, has gotten away with this. But was she happy about this? Was she happy about Kathy dying? Oh no, of course she wasn't, because now she has lost her outlet. She used to take out her rage and her frustration out on Kathy, and now she's lost that. And this is when her rage and her frustration now turns back to Shane. Shane is now the main target again, and heartbreakingly this would end in tragedy as well. Over the next year, Shelly became extremely paranoid that someone was going to find out about Kathy's murder, and Shelly was really worried that Shane was going to be the one that turned on the family and told the police about Kathy's murder. Shelly would tell Dave over and over again, Shane's going to turn us in. Shane is going to ruin everything. We need to get rid of him. And all the while, Shelly is isolating Shane. She's beating him, abusing him. She kept saying over and over again, we need to get rid of him. We need to get rid of him, Dave. Shelly even went as far as planting evidence that Shane was sexually assaulting the youngest sibling, Tori. One day, Shelly just started running around with a pair of blood-soaked knickers and she was shouting, see, look what Shane's doing. And it was all a lie. Obviously, Shane was not guilty of this, but Dave went crazy and he severely beat Shane for this. Now, I don't know if Dave actually truly believed that Shane was sexually abusing Tori or not. I'm past trying to understand Dave, to be honest. Shelly was actually probably right to be paranoid about Shane because Shane did have a secret weapon. Shane actually did have evidence of the abuse and torture of Kathy. He actually had photos that showed Kathy naked, beaten and bruised. He had been holding on to these photos for a very long time and he was getting closer and closer to blowing the lid on all of this. Now, don't ask me how he got these photos. I honestly don't know, but he wanted to go to the police and he told Nikki about his plan. He said, Nikki, I've got these photos, I've got the evidence, let's run away, let's go to the police, let's report them, let them suffer for what they did to Kathy, what they have done to us. Now, Nikki was torn. She wanted Shane to go to the police. She wanted this whole thing to be over. But then she was also absolutely terrified of her mom. And her mom, Shelly, has gotten away with everything in her life. So Nikki, this is probably me assuming, but I assume that Nikki probably thought that her mom would also get away with this. It didn't matter if Shane had these photos. Her mom would still get away with it. And then they would all pay 100 times more. So Nikki, because she was so terrified of her mom, she went to Shelly and told her about Shane and about the photos. Shelly literally tore up everything in that house trying to find these photos. But unfortunately, Shelly was not about to let Shane get away with this. She gave instructions to Dave on what she wanted him to do. Unbelievably, Dave agreed. One night in February of 1995, approximately 7 years after Shane moved in, so 7 years, he's gone through this for 7 years, Dave made his way outside to one of the outer buildings. He entered the outer house and tragically, before Shane could even defend himself, Dave pulled out a rifle, pointed it at Shane, and pulled the trigger. After being isolated, after this absolutely inhumane treatment, Shane has now just been murdered by Dave, but also at the hands of Shelly. And this was all just to keep him quiet about the first murder that she committed. Shane really has suffered his whole life. He was so vulnerable. His birth dad was not the best. And then he went to live with Shelly, who he thought was going to be the best thing ever. He thought that this was going to be his home, his family. But Shelly just destroyed Shane's life, all for her own entertainment. And after Shane's death, Shelly and Dave wanted to get away with it. They wanted to get away with it just like they did with Kathy. So they burned Shane's body and scattered his remains in the ocean, which is exactly what they did with Kathy's body. They burnt her body and scattered it into the ocean. But this time, nobody knew what happened to Shane, because at the time, Shane, Nikki and Sammy all knew that Kathy had died, that she'd been murdered. But this time, Nikki and Sammy didn't know that Shane had been murdered. Shelly told them that Shane had run away, that he was now in Alaska. Shane was even reported missing, but as far as everyone was concerned, he had run away. He was in Alaska and he was never coming back. But Nikki knew that that wasn't true. She was tortured by grief because Nikki had obviously turned Shane into Shelly. Nikki knew that Shane had been murdered. She feared the worst. And she knew that her mother had just gone away with murder again. So right now it feels like, okay, this should be the end of the case. I mean, a lot has happened. There has been so much tragedy and heartbreak, but unfortunately it's not. Shelly still has one more final victim, but we do have a few things that happen just before that. So both Nikki and Sammy now managed to escape. This actually happened over the space of a few years. They didn't escape together. Now, when Nikki was 18, she got a place at college. Now, she had been dreaming of going to college for the longest time. And when she got the place at college, she saw this as her future, a way out. But of course, as soon as Shelly found out that her daughter got a place at college, she did everything in her power to destroy it. Shelly made Nikki go to college in dirty clothes. She wasn't allowed to shower. She eventually cut off Nikki financially as well. She took away her form of transportation. She basically made it impossible for Nikki to go to college. And eventually Nikki did drop out of college, which is just so sad. Shelly won't even let Nikki have this one thing. Instead, Nikki was now forced to stay at home with her mom and do chores. But Nikki wasn't about to let her mom win this time. So one day, Nikki just went up to her mom and started beating her back. She was shouting at her mom, "You're not gonna fuck with me anymore." And Nikki could actually see the shock in her mom's eyes because no one until this point had really ever stood up to her. Shelly didn't really know how to handle this because, like I said, no one had really ever stood up to her before. So Shelly, her solution was to send Nikki away. She sent her away to live with her aunt. Now, this was possibly the best decision that Shelly has ever made, because when Nikki went to live with her aunt was a nice person. And Nikki actually confided a little bit in her aunt, and she said, "My mom is mean to me. Don't send me back there." She didn't exactly go into the details. She didn't say anything about Kathy or Shane, but she had finally opened up to somebody. And Nikki, from this moment on, never returned home. At the age of 18, she had finally escaped. So that was Nikki's escape. She is finally safe. But now we have to move on to Sammy, because now that Nikki has left, Sammy has now become the main target for Shelly's abuse. Sammy had always been favoured. Out of all of them, she had always suffered the least. She had still suffered, like we have covered. But thankfully, Sammy did have a support system around her. She had really good friends at school. She also had a boyfriend. She did also stay in contact with Nikki, and she managed to hold on. She managed to pull through, and in her senior year of high school, she plotted her escape. So one night, Sammy snuck out of her house. She managed to hide at her boyfriend's house for a few days before she hitched a ride to her grandmother Lara's house. So Lara, if you remember, is Shelly's stepmom, and Lara had stayed in contact with the children all this time. At a distance though, Shelly always kind of kept her quite far away, and Sammy had finally escaped to her grandmother Lara's house, and Lara kept her safe. Now Shelly did try and lure Sammy back to the house. She was not happy at all that Sammy left, and there were some occasions where Sammy did go back to the house to visit her sister. Apart from that, Sammy had now also managed to successfully escape that house. So now it's just Shelly, Dave and Tori left in the house. And with Dave away Monday to Friday, it was pretty much just Shelly and Tori in the house. And two guesses for what happens next. This case really is just never ending, isn't it? For years, Tori had managed to escape her mother's abuse. She had even somewhat enjoyed her life. She had had probably the most normal life. She was too young to remember or be aware of what happened to Kathy, what happened to Shane. She was now currently 10 years old. And this is when the abuse started. It started off the same as it did with everybody else. It was just the odd punch, slap, kick now and again. Then it would graduate to using weapons. Then the beatings would get even worse and it would escalate over time. There was also shower restrictions. She was forced to go to school without showering, with dirty clothes on. But on top of all of this, Shelly also found some new punishments for Tori, punishments that she had never inflicted on anyone else. Because Tori had just started to hit puberty, and Shelly was thinking up new ways of humiliation. She implemented what she called progress checks. Tori would have to strip naked in the living room so Shelly could examine her developing body. Tori would stand there embarrassed, humiliated. She would say to her mom, "The other moms don't do this. Why are you doing this?" Shelly even bullied Tori into cutting off some of her pubic hair for her baby book. And it was around this time that Shelly met her third and final victim, a man named Ron Woodworth. Now, Ron was in his mid-50s and he was such a kind, sweet-hearted man. He was currently working in the care system, and this is when he met Shelly. He had recently fallen on hard times. He had recently gone through a breakup with his long-term boyfriend. His dad had also recently passed away and he was looking after his elderly mother. He had also recently been evicted, and when Shelly found out this, she swooped in, played the hero and gave Ron somewhere to live. So Ron moved in, and I feel like a broken record because the exact same thing happens all over again. At first, it's really good. Ron is really appreciative that he now has somewhere to live and he would do anything for Shelly. It first started off with chores, then the chores got more extreme, then the beatings would start, they would escalate, then shower and bathroom privileges were taken away. She isolated him, restricted his food, he was made to sleep outside, he had to be naked while doing chores as well. Just the usual routine, like it's the same for everybody, and this went on for 3 years. 3 years Ron was subjected to this. Ron suffered the exact same way that Kathy did. Shelly gave Ron the same inhumane punishments, but she went further with Ron. She made him drink his own urine. She forced him repeatedly to jump off the roof of the house onto the gravel below. She made him do this over and over again until he couldn't walk anymore. Like I mentioned, Tori was too young to remember anything about Kathy and Shane, but now she is witnessing what is happening to Ron. She can't take this. Tori and Ron had actually grown pretty close. Ron was a very sweet man and Tori absolutely adored him. She called him Uncle Ron. When Ron first moved in and he was in that honeymoon period with Shelly, he would do so much with Tori. He would read her stories. He would play with her. They bonded so much. And you've probably thought it 100 times already because I know I have. But how is Shelly getting away with all of this? Well, it turns out that when Nikki escaped, she actually did go to the police. But the police couldn't back up Nikki's story. There was no evidence. And unbelievably, the police didn't investigate any further. Which just makes my blood boil. I know that there is nothing that we can do now about Kathy or Shane, but if they had just investigated, maybe Ron could have been saved. So Nikki moved on with her life. She tried to move on, put the past behind her. She was even about to get married. And Sammy did the same. Now both Nikki and Sammy at this point thought that Tori was okay. They didn't know at this point that she was also being abused. So Shelly just keeps on going, getting away with everything. And I know that I said that Ron was the last victim of Shelly's, but there is actually one more suspicious death that is linked to Shelly. Now, at some point, Shelly had managed to insert herself into the life of an elderly war veteran named James McClintock, who goes by the name Mac. Somehow, Shelly became his registered caregiver and she manipulated him into changing his will. In the will, he was to leave his entire estate to Shelly. And then, tragically, not long after the will was changed, Mac was rushed to hospital and pronounced dead. It was found that he died from blunt force trauma to the head, but his death was ruled an accident and no investigation was made. Shelly then inherited his $145,000 estate, and even though it has never been proven that Mac was a victim of Shelly's, it's just too coincidental. And then the torture and the abuse of Ron and Tori back at home only continues to get worse. One particularly bad punishment for Tori was when Shelly dragged her outside, locked her inside a dog kennel that was full of feces, grabbed the hose, and then sprayed the hose on full into the dog kennel, which made the feces go everywhere. They went all over Tori, over her face, in her mouth. Ron's body had started to not function properly. His brain had started to fail him, just like Kathy. Tori has reported that in the end, Ron actually smelled like rotten flesh. And very tragically, after 3 years of being tortured and abused by Shelly and Dave, Ron passed away. His exact cause of death is unknown. And it's just another life, another completely innocent life that they've just taken away. It's just unbelievable. There's just so much heartbreak in this case. So you're probably thinking, does this case ever end? Because it feels never ending, but thankfully we are going to finally start to see the downfall of Shelly Knotek. So one day Shelly phones up Dave. He's clearly at work and she says to him that she's just found Ron's body, he is dead, and he needs to come home and help her with the body. Now, right now, Tori doesn't know that Ron is dead. She actually just thinks that Ron is missing. She probably thinks that Ron has tried to escape. So Shelly wants Tori out of the way. So Shelly sends Tori to stay with her sister, Sammy. She basically wants her out the way so they can deal with Ron's body. But what Shelly didn't know is that the three sisters, Nikki, Sammy, and Tori, would reunite, join forces, and take her down. Now, when the three sisters got together, they didn't initially plan to take their mother down, but they were talking and certain things came up. And this is when it was revealed to Nikki and Sammy that Tori was now being abused. Upon hearing this, their hearts just broke. They couldn't believe it. They did truly believe that Tori would be safe. They couldn't let this go on. They couldn't let their little baby sister go back to their house and suffer at the hands of Shelly. Something needed to be done. So they first went to the police station and all three of them refused to leave until they were heard. Thankfully, unlike Nikki a few years earlier, they were taken seriously. All three sisters gave harrowing accounts to the police of their experience with Shelly, what they had seen, Kathy, Shane, now Ron. And the police immediately contacted Shelly and Dave and informed them that CPS were taking Tori away and that an investigation was being opened. And when Shelly found out about this, she was in shock. She could not believe that her three daughters that she thought she had complete control over had gone against her. So she ordered Dave to go to the police station, and she thought that Dave was gonna somehow manage to sort this out and somehow manage to drag Tori back. But when Dave got to the police station, that is not what happened. Because as soon as Dave arrived at the police station, he was dragged into an interview, and it wasn't long until he confessed to everything. The guilt that he felt was just too much. He needed to get it off his chest. So he told the police everything about all of the abuse to the children, about Kathy, Shane, and Ron. And immediately after this, both Dave and Shelly Knotek were arrested. And it is now 2003 when they get arrested and taken into custody. And the abuse of Nikki started back in the 80s. So this went on for decades. But unfortunately, I have now more infuriating information to share with all of you. It was found that there was going to be a struggle to get enough evidence to convict Shelly. There was no bodies. There was no body of Kathy. There was no body of Shane. They did have Ron's body, but they couldn't prove what had caused his death. All the police had were the testimonies of Dave and the kids. And now Dave doesn't actually want to assist the investigation anymore, so the police don't even have that. So the prosecution panicked. They thought that they were not going to have enough evidence, they were not going to be able to build a case, and both Dave and Shelly would walk free. So they made a plea deal. So Dave pleaded guilty to second-degree murder of Shane, and Shelly pleaded guilty to second-degree murder of Kathy and manslaughter for Ron. In return, Dave Knotek only got 15 years in prison, and Shelly Knotek only got 22 years in prison. Make that make sense. What the actual hell? What these two did, and they only got 15 years and 22 years. And Dave is already out of prison. Dave Knotek is already out of prison. I just can't believe it. Shelly, she will be 68 this year. She could be released this year. She will be eligible for early release in 2022. Oh my God, please no. We cannot have this. Shelly definitely 100% should never, ever be released from prison. She is a danger to society. She has proven that from a very, very young age. Her manipulation started at like the age of 6, and it probably started earlier than that, but we don't know. She will be 68. If she is released this year, she will be 68. That is still young enough to manipulate people, take advantage of them, torture them, abuse them in some kind of way. The way that Shelly went about things, the way that she murdered people, she will be capable of that at the age of 68. I don't even know what to say. I don't. I've tried to figure out what the hell has been going on in Shelly and Dave's head this whole time. The whole time I've been researching. I agree that Dave definitely started off as a victim, but his actions for the majority of this case are inexcusable. And Shelly, I have given up trying to figure out what the hell happened there. Like, I just don't. I think Shelly is probably one of those cases where she was just born bad. She's just pure evil. She really is pure evil. So I'm going to focus the end of this video on the victims of this case, because there are so many, and the victims of this case suffered in the worst ways imaginable. Kathy Loreno was described as a sweet, kind-hearted woman who would go out of her way to help anyone, no matter what. She was close with her family before Shelly had torn them apart, and when Kathy had moved in with the Knotek family, all she wanted to do was help. She protected the kids' interest before her own, and she had died in the most cruel death imaginable at the hands of someone who she thought was a friend. And Kathy was only 36 years old when she was murdered. Shane Watson was described as someone with a fun personality who was always smiling despite the hardships in his early life. When he moved into the Knotek household, he was hopeful and optimistic about a better future for himself. Shelly Knotek had so cruelly taken away this opportunity. He was only 19 years old. Ron Woodworth was described as a great guy who loved cats, loved sharing stories, and was willing to help out anyone. Later on in his life, he had fallen on hard times and turned to someone who he believed was a friend. Shelly Knotek then took advantage of him in the most horrific of ways, and he was only 57 years old. And then finally, we have Nikki, Sammy, and Tori. In 2019, all three girls sat down with author Greg Olson. After all of these years, they wanted their story to be told. They wanted everyone to know about the monster that was Shelly Knotek. And thankfully, all three, Nikki, Sammy, and Tori, have gone on to live independent lives. Nikki is now married with her own children. Her and her husband run a very successful business, and they live in a $1 million home. Sammy is also married with children, and she works as a teacher in an elementary school. And now Tori, who is in her early 30s, is living independently, working as a social media manager in the hospitality industry. To this day, all three girls remain incredibly close. Their bond is as strong as ever, and my heart goes out to all three of them. I hope that they are doing okay. I hope that they have gotten the help that they need if they needed it, and I just hope that they can live the best lives that they can. Let me know all of your thoughts, theories, and opinions in the comments down below. Don't forget to leave me your case suggestions, because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to Two Dots for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye.